Now, I realized when I was engaging with what to say on this talk that, like, my problem is that I want to tell you, like, everything that is exciting about Shinran's world and approach to the Dharma, and it's so thrilling and it's so fascinating. And then I'm like, and it's one talk, Maitrisiddhi, one. So on the True and Trusting retreat that I do at Taraloka, we have 10 days for this, and it's like I'm trying to sort of like cram it in, and it's kind of, okay, reel back your expectations. Okay, so let's start. I'm just going to read out a bit of Shinran from, well, actually it's from the Tanisho. So this is this disciple of his writing it after he's died, saying, "Thus have I heard from the Master." So this is from Tanisho 16. Some people say that if a practicer of true entrusting should unexpectedly become angry, act wantonly, or argue with others, they should by all means undergo turning of mind. Does this mean that we should sunder evil and practice good? In the person of single-hearted Nembutsu, the turning of mind occurs only once. The turning of mind refers to this: transformation of those ignorant of the primal vow of other power, who, being granted Amida's wisdom and realizing the impossibility of the everyday mind attaining birth, abandon the old mind and entrust the self to the primal vow. Once true entrusting is settled, we realize that our birth is due to the workings of Amida, the measureless, and not to our calculations. Even though we may do evil, even more should we think about the power of the vow. Then tenderness and forbearance will appear by virtue of made to become so by itself. And Tanisho 10, the Master Shinran said, in the Nembutsu, no self-working is true working. It is beyond description, explanation, and conception. So the whole of this talk is going to be unpacking that. So let's start with a little recap. So yesterday we looked at Shinran's life, and we looked at his process of turning through the 3 vows. So he starts with self-power practice, and he describes self-power as the effort to attain birth by endeavoring to make yourself worthy through mending the confusion in your acts, words, and thoughts, confident of your own powers and guided by your own calculative thinking. And then he moves to self and other power practice, where it's like a partnership. You're saying Amida's name. It's like you're calling on the transcendental, but it's your power. You have to do it. You have to be worthy. You have to do it hard enough, fast enough, long enough. You have to earn awakening. And then he crashes. There he is on his monastery. He's been trying this for 20 years, and he feels like he's getting nowhere. And he sees himself as a total spiritual failure. And at that point, something quite different happens. And he moves into a radical entrusting to spiritual awakening or birth in the Pure Land as given or granted or directed to us by Amida's primal vow. This is spiritual power in the universe. You know, we could think of it as bodhicitta, alive in the universe, compassionate towards us, inviting us, calling us all the time. And even his response of being able to entrust to that was not his entrusting, his shinjin, his faith. It was granted by this Buddha world, this Buddha universe, by bodhicitta working within him. So we looked at how he reimagined world in this way. And we looked at how Bhante talks about, in a similar way, at the heart of reality, there is something that is of the nature of spiritual friendship. So we're looking at Shinran moving from a self-development model of seeing the spiritual path or the spiritual life into a very different model. And actually, I'm not sure that self-surrender is the most appropriate term for that, but let's leave that to one side. But I think the important thing here is it's like we're bearing in mind that like these different perspectives, these myths on what it looks like for a being to be opening, awakening, whatever term we want to use, they are simply ways of imagining what this process looks like, how that is. I can do it. What the Buddha attained, I too can attain. I can't do it. I have to entrust myself to the inconceivable power of Amida's vow, which grasps us, never to abandon us. It's like every way of talking, every myth, every story about the Dharma life, it reveals something about what that process is, and it conceals something else. So you can't take any single map or myth or model and say, oh yeah, that's it, that's right. So what we're doing is we're looking at, well, what does it reveal when we see the world through the lens of Shinran's perspective? So for the rest of the talk, we're going to be looking at how Shinran becomes what he terms a person of single-hearted Nembutsu. He talks of himself and this path as living the Nembutsu. So I said a few things yesterday about the Nembutsu, so let's keep it simple on this occasion. And so the Nembutsu here, I'm talking about the phrase Namo Amida Butsu. So this is recitative Nembutsu, where you simply call the name of Amida Buddha. And for Shinran, that is the only practice, and in a sense, it isn't a practice, because you're not saying it to make yourself worthy, to deserve something if you say it enough. You're simply saying it as a spontaneous response to this Buddha world where awakening is coming towards you and inviting you to the Pure Land at every moment. Now, in Shinran's tradition, the Nembutsu comes to encapsulate something quite specific that is particular to Shinran. So for him, it came to represent the twin aspects of deep mind. Now, it's like, the thing is, Shinran uses all this kind of language which comes from the previous 1,000 years of Pure Land tradition. And it's quite hard to sort of, because it's not hard to explain. It's just like you'd have to say, well, Chantal said this, and then Shinran did this with it. But anyway, so let's try and keep this simple, Maitrisiddhi. There are 3 aspects of the entrusting mind mentioned in the Pure Land Sutras. Deep mind is one of them. Chantal was a Pure Land master who lived in China, maybe the 6th or 7th century, something like that. And Shinran regards him as one of the patriarchs of Honan school. So the twin aspects of deep mind. Deep mind is the deeply entrusting mind. There are 2 aspects. One is to believe deeply and decidedly that you are a foolish being of karmic evil, caught in birth and death, ever sinking and ever wandering in transmigration from innumerable kalpas in the past, with never a condition that would lead to emancipation. The second is to believe deeply and decidedly that Amida Buddha's 48 vows grasp sentient beings, and that allowing yourself to be carried by the power of the vow without any doubt or apprehension, you will attain birth in the Pure Land. So what these twin aspects of deep mind are doing is they're holding 2 aspects of the experience of living a Dharma life. So one is you are in touch with the transcendent, and another is you are conditioned, you are limited, you crash about in samsara doing stupid things, and that is what it looks like. And you are in touch with what is transcendent. And those 2 aspects for Shinran are inseparable. That is just what it looks like to be an enlightening being. So we're now going to look at those 2 aspects kind of separately, like one by one, and kind of unpack them a bit. So we're going to start with the foolish being of karmic evil. I was talking yesterday about how Shinran called himself a bombu, a silly, foolish, stupid person. And he always considered he was bombu, and he was always going to be bombu. And I think for me, when I hear that, it's just such a relief. Yeah, I'm a bombu, I'm just an idiot. It's like I've got all these kind of ideals and aspirations, and I really want to behave well, and I really want to follow the precepts, and I really want to kind of act with love and metta. And what actually happens, that's not always what happens. I don't know about you lot, but it's not always what happens for me. And sort of the relief of like, oh yeah, that's just what it looks like. I'm conditioned. I'm finite. I'm karmically bound. I'm unenlightened. Yeah, afraid so. That's how it is. Yeah. So for Shinran, this isn't a sort of fault of the individual. It's existential. Now, at the time, and for many centuries previously, there was this idea in the Pure Land tradition that we had entered the age of Mappo, which is the age of the degenerate Dharma. So like 500 years after Shakyamuni, you could still practice the Dharma and get enlightened because you were close enough to the Buddha. And the 500 years after that, well, you could still practice the Dharma, but you weren't really going to get enlightened. And now we're in the third 500-year period. And Shinran describes this as the Dharma treasure has all gone back into the Naga's palace. So we're in the age of the degenerate Dharma. And so beings can't actually practice the Dharma. Now, you don't really have to worry about whether that's true or not. Highly debatable, but it's more like the perspective is failures in our practice are not the individual failure of a being. It's just saying that's how it is. That's what it looks like at the moment. So don't all fall into despair at this point, because don't forget we've got Amida's primal vow that saves all beings to come. Okay, so you have to be really careful who you talk to Shinran about. Just to say, it's like I do loads of teaching at Taraloka and West Wales Buddhist Group. This isn't what I'm teaching them, okay? In case anybody's worrying. So what Shinran's doing is here. What he's doing is he's reframing the nature of spiritual failure, which could be in a big way, or could just be like, oh, I walk into the Taraloka kitchen and I bite somebody's head off again. So our failures, like the everyday failures of my ability to live my ideals. So what is it that fails? So for Shinran, what fails here? When you see it more deeply, what fails is the calculating, self-serving mind that sees the Dharma life in terms of creating a better me. Like, if I just practice hard enough, I'm going to have the desired self. I'm going to turn myself into this marvelous me. And I'll be this being of shining light, and everybody will say, oh, Maitrisiddhi, she's so kind, she's so wise, she's so marvelous. Almost like a sort of fantasy avatar of me, and like that's what the Dharma life is about. Now, of course, that's what my egocentric conditioned mind wants. It just wants this marvelous me. Like that's what the Dharma project is about, as far as I'm concerned, it's concerned. Now let's so now I'm going to read a bit from Bhante out of the Yogi's Joy. And you'll probably be familiar with it. It's the bit where Milarepa meets a young man at Silver Springs. And Milarepa kind of knows this guy's going to be his disciple, but the guy, the young man, he's quite arrogant, and he tries to buy the Dharma by offering to Milarepa, his horse and his trousers and his hat and, everything that you can think of. So this is Bhante's comments on this. So he's saying the main theme of this story is the impotence of a bargaining attitude with regard to the Dharma. The Dharma cannot be bought, because the Dharma can only be given, not bought. In a sense, the young man is trying to take the not given. He wants to keep hold of his ego, to get hold of the Dharma for himself. But as long as that ego is there, he is not going to be able to receive the Dharma. This will, this grabbing, this ego has to be broken down. He has to realize his complete spiritual impotence. Only then, when he starts doubting whether he has any capacity for the Dharma at all, does faith arise and he can move forward. In the end, the young man has to offer himself. And when he does this, when he no longer keeps anything of himself in reserve, there is no one left behind to expect something in exchange. The moral of the story seems to be that you get results only after you have put all your energy into something, failed, and given up or given in. Having tried over and over again to achieve something, in fact, to grab it, you are eventually forced to accept defeat, to recognize that you are powerless, that your egoistic will can achieve nothing in this situation. Then something within you shifts. Whatever it is that you fail to achieve, you find yourself unable to step forward or back. You are right up against it, and in the end, you can only surrender. So what Shinran is suggesting is a radical reframing of our attitude to our failures in the Dharma life. So what is it that fails? It's the calculating mind that wants to grab the Dharma for itself. And Shinran's shift is from going for refuge to the calculating mind, my ability to practice, my ability to make myself worthy, my ability to earn the transcendental. And realizing, in the words of the text I read out to start with, realizing the impossibility of the everyday mind attaining birth. The calculating mind that wants to grab the Dharma for itself is never the mind that is going to be awakened. So Pure Land in general can be criticized for being blind faith. It's like you've got blind faith in like Amida and the primal vow and all the rest of it. We don't realize what blind faith we have in our calculating minds, the minds that say, if I do this, I'll get that. If I do this, I won't get that other thing that I don't want. Our deep investment and belief in the mind that just wants what it wants and wants to get that. And that is the mind that we inevitably, totally inevitably bring to our Dharma life. So I think of what Shinran is doing as a transcendental critique of religion. So we're probably all familiar with Vimalakirti as a transcendental critiquer of religion. So this is where Bhante unpacks it. And Vimalakirti goes off and has all these conversations with different bodhisattvas and arahants and exposes their limited perspectives on the Dharma. So the perspectives, they're not wrong. They're just not ultimate. And then we have the perfection of wisdom as another transcendental critique of religion. And in A Survey of Buddhism, Bhante talks about the perfection of wisdom and Pure Land as a pair. It's very interesting. So what the perfection of wisdom is critiquing, of course, is the ability of the intellectual, conceptual mind to grasp the Dharma. So what Shinran is doing is he's critiquing the Dharma life as ego project, as project designed to create a marvelous me. That is Shinran's transcendental critique of the Dharma. So what Shinran is seeing is something that is pointed out by the Buddha. So in the No Self Sutta, so this is supposed to be the second teaching ever given by the Buddha. So the first one is the Four Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path. This is to the ascetics in the Deer Park. And his second ever teaching is the No Self Sutta. And in this sutta, he's what he's doing is he's pointing out that we think we are the owners and controllers of ourselves, and we're not. So he's going through the 5 skandhas and he says, bhikkhus, material form is not self. If form was self, this form would not lead to affliction. And it could be had of form, let my form be thus, let my form not be thus. And it is because form is not self that it therefore leads to affliction, and that it cannot be had of form. Let my form be thus, let my form not be thus. So he goes through all the 5 skandhas, including sanskaras, including our habit patterns. And he says exactly the same thing. You know, if our sanskaras, if our emotional habits, if, you know, the kind of fabric of what makes up what we think is me, this conditioned nature, if those were me, if they were under my control, well, they wouldn't lead to affliction. And we could have it of our sanskaras. Well, let my sanskaras be thus, let my sanskaras not be thus. Oh, I've got a sanskara about biting people's heads off. Oh, I can just decide not to do it because I'm the owner and controller of myself. And the Buddha is saying, well, no, it's not true. You know, who kind of gets up in the morning and thinks, I know, what a great idea. I'm going to have a really big reaction today. Or, I'm going to have a massive button pulled about something that happened in my childhood. What a great plan. I know, that's what I'm going to do with my day. You know, who wakes up and thinks that? It's like they happen to us, don't they? It's like it just happens. So this is so in the survey, Bhante talks about the 2 faces of noumenal belief, like the 2 faces of you know, thinking that we've got a fixed substantial self, and one of them is nisata, no own being, and we're probably more familiar with like looking at like we're compounded, you know, we're made of the elements, they come together, they'll fall away when we die. But the other aspect is nijivatam. We are not the source of our own life essence. Each of us is a conditioned event. We're not the authors of ourselves. We're not self-produced or self-determined. So what we're talking about here is karma vipaka. And you know how yesterday I was talking about the moon, and when you look at the moon and there's like a little crescent, and the crescent is all lit up and it's so bright and it's so beautiful and you can see it in the sky. And that's like the teaching of the gap, that we can change, we can make different choices, we can find the gap, we can bring mindfulness and kindness, we can do something different. It's a marvelous teaching. It's a fantastic teaching. Nothing against that teaching. And there's the dark side of the moon as well, which is the depth and the extent to which we are conditioned, we are limited, we are karmically bound. And this is what Shinran is drawing our attention to. And actually, we can't just sit there and by an effort of will say, oh, I'm not going to be karmically bound. Those things aren't going to happen to me anymore. They are. So what this perspective requires is a total honesty, and it's like a mix of complete honesty, like just seeing how much we fail. Like every day, I probably break the precepts every, couple of minutes. And simultaneously, a total forgiveness. Like, yep, this is my inability to live by my ideals. And yep, and that's how it is. That is just what it is to be conditioned, to be bound. Very much, you see, there's so many, like, stick to what you're talking about. The thing is, everything starts linking, and then I just want to tell you all these exciting things, and it's like, no, stick to your plan, Maitrisiddhi. Okay. So, what we want to do is just look at, well, what is the effect of bringing that perspective? So one of the effects, and that's a genuine question, like, go away and kind of think, well, what happens if you bring that perspective to your Dharma life? And then the answer to that will tell you whether you need to reflect more on the gap, or whether you want to go more into being a being of karmic evil, forever drowning and wandering without ever knowing the way to liberation. It's like, what happens for you personally when you take that reflection on? So I think one of the effects for me is I drop a lot of drama. Like, there's this whole drama of me, like, oh, yes, I'm going to be a really good person. Oh, yeah, I managed to do that difficult interaction really well. Hey, look at me. I'm a good person. And then like something else comes along and I don't know, have a reaction or speak sharply to someone or whatever it is, and it's like, oh no, I failed, oh no, I'm trying to be this person that's living by the precepts. There's a whole shed load of drama in it. And so this is the Tannis show again. When we think good thoughts, we think we are good. And when we think evil thoughts, we think we are evil, not realizing fully that it is not these thoughts, but the inconceivable power of the vow that makes our salvation possible. So this is where the teachings of Shinran sound as though he takes ethics and he throws them in the dustbin. And in a sense, he does. So if you get ordained in the Jodo Shinshu, Shinran's tradition, you don't take any precepts. There's no precepts. But, okay, I'm going to come on to the but. So what Bhante's comment about this, so this is from the survey. So he says, this teaching, the assurance of birth in Sukhavati without ethics or merits, is not the antinomianism for which it might at first sight be mistaken. Okay, antinomianism, not taking ethics seriously, okay? It is merely intended to assert the absolute discontinuity of the transcendental and the mundane. The real is not to be attained by means of a series of increments of the unreal. In the last resort, emancipation depends upon the eruption into the universe of a factor that confronts our ego consciousness as the other power. And from the Bodhisattva ideal, he says, there is nothing one can do in a mundane sense to deserve the transcendental. Just as one can't arrive at wisdom by accumulating any amount of merit. So Shinran had endless trouble with his stance on ethics. It's just totally misunderstandable. So he had loads of trouble with licensed evil. So this was a term for people who kind of said, well, Amida's vow is for everyone, and it doesn't matter whether you do good or you do evil. In fact, it's even taught that the primal vow was directed at those people bound, karmically bound, and filled with karmic evil. Which, in a sense, it is actually, because if you get enlightened, if you can get enlightened by your own, under your own steam, well, that's marvelous, great. You don't need Amida's help, then, do you? You can do it by yourself. You know, the vow's not for you. The vow, this adhisthana that is coming towards us, that's for people like us who keep on doing the same habits again and again, that, you know, helplessly watch their buttons being pushed in exactly the same old way again and again. You know, that's who it's for. But then you've got people who took this to say, oh, well, I can do exactly what I want. And I know I'll deliberately just go and do what I want, because then I'll definitely get born in the Pure Land. So a lot of Shinran's letters that he's writing to different sanghas in different parts of Japan that he's got a connection with is trying to correct this misapprehension. So Shinran definitely expects change to happen. So here's one of his letters. He says, "You must not do what should not be done, think what should not be thought, or say what should not be said, thinking that you can be born in the Pure Land regardless of it. Human beings are such that, maddened by the passions of greed, we desire to possess. Maddened by the passions of anger, we hate that which should not be hated. Seeking to go against the law of cause and effect, led astray by the passions of ignorance, we do what should not even be thought. But the person who purposely thinks and does what he or she should not, saying that this is permissible because of the Buddha's wondrous vow to save the foolish being, does not truly desire to reject the world, nor does such a one consciously feel himself a being of karmic evil. Hence, such people have no aspiration for the Nembutsu, nor for the Buddha's vow. Thus, however diligently they engage in Nembutsu with such an attitude, it is difficult for them to attain birth in the next life. And he sort of ends up saying, please be sure to read this letter to everyone. All the Nembutsu practitioners in the remote districts should, without exception, see this letter. You know, he really is, you know, it's something that he tries quite hard to emphasize to Nembutsu practitioners. And from another letter, signs of long years of saying the Nembutsu and aspiring for birth can be seen in the change in the heart that had been bad, and in the deep warmth for friends and fellow practices. This is the sign of rejecting the world. So, when Shinran is asking us to see clearly our spiritual failures and not to see that as a problem, just like it's existential, it's of the nature of being conditioned. What he's pointing to is when we're maddened by the passions, you know, the things that, you know, we're doing our best to live by our ideals, and then we fail. And that is what we bring forgiveness to. And actually, it's like that's towards our failure, and it's towards the failure of others in the Sangha, to our teachers, our fellow practitioners. Like each of us is conditioned, each of us is karmically bound. Do we expect something different? So that's one aspect of these twin aspects of deep mind. So now we're going to look at grasped, never to be abandoned. We should believe deeply and decidedly that Amida Buddha's 48 vows grasp sentient beings, and that allowing yourself to be carried by the power of the vow without any doubt or apprehension, you will attain birth. So Shinran uses a whole load of linked terms that are rooted in the myth of the Pure Land, you know, the myth of Dharmakara Bodhisattva, practicing for eons, making vows, establishing the Pure Land. So it's rooted in this mythic context, but this myth is giving form or making visible dynamics in the way things are. And, you know, that's what the story is kind of making visible. Now, it certainly seems that, certainly at points in the whole Pure Land tradition, Pure Land practitioners would take this very, very literally, like, you know, there actually was a bodhisattva called Dharmakara, and the Pure Land is an actual place, and you actually go to it at death. And you get people in Japan, like this is like really rich people, you know, they'd build a palace and gardens that were supposed to be like the Pure Land, so that they could see it on the point of death. And then when you die, they'd give you a red thread that you could hold in your hands that goes up to an image of the Pure Land, and you were going to be pulled by this thread on your deathbed into the Pure Land, and then you would get enlightened and live happily ever after. Now, you can tell from Shinran's writings that he absolutely doesn't take this literally at all. It's like he is inhabiting a world where this myth is vibrant and alive, but it's not, he doesn't take it as like literally true. So first we've got Amida. So this term Amida, it's like meter, actually, because the root is the same. It simply means measureless, limitless. So A is the negative prefix. So Amida, the unmeasured, the boundless, the limitless. Now, when you write Amida in Chinese characters, as was done in Japan, there's no way of distinguishing the name of a person from the quality. So every time you read Amida, you could read that as like an embodied figure, but actually it's like, it could just be the measureless. So we rely on the measureless vow. Is that bit of the Tanisha I was looking at? Yeah, so it says, being granted Amida's wisdom. So that's one way of looking at it. Like there's an embodied figure called Amida who sat on the shrine. But it could just as clearly be being granted the measureless wisdom, being granted the limitless wisdom. So very often Amida is referred to in terms of light, the light of wisdom, the light of non-discrimination, the unhindered light, the unequaled light. So this is all trying to evoke qualities of the awakened mind. And the light is unhindered. So these qualities of the awakened mind, they're not kind of over there in some Pure Land. It's like they are illumining the universe, and they are illumining us at every moment. Can we awaken to that? So this is Bhante in his commentary on the Sutra of Golden Light. He says, the golden light is what transforms the self and transforms the world. But where does this light come from? It is not enough to say that it is a spiritual light, for it is more than this. It is, we may say, a transcendental light. It is therefore without beginning and without end. It does not shine forth from anything, from any particular place, any particular direction, though it may appear to do so, or even be spoken of as doing so. We may call it the light of truth, the light of reality, the light of the Buddha. But even that does not go far enough. It is this light which is the truth, is reality, is the Buddha. So this is actually very, very similar to how Shinran talks about Amida. So he says, Supreme Buddha is formless, and because of being formless is called Jinen. So this is another one of these linked terms. So jinen can be translated naturalness, or made to become so by itself. How does spiritual transformation happen? How does, in Shinran's words, the heart that had been bad suddenly express warmth and kindness towards teachers and fellow practitioners? It's through jinen, the natural working of this transcendental light in our beings. So back to this quote from Shinran. He says, Buddha, when appearing with form, is not called supreme nirvana. In order to make it known that Supreme Buddha is formless, the name Amida Buddha is expressly used. So I have been taught. Amida Buddha fulfills the purpose of making us know the significance of jinen. So he's saying, well, Amida Buddha, that's skillful means. We can imagine the Buddha as a compassionate being made of light, holding his hands up or calling us to the Pure Land. But that's not what Amida Buddha is. Amida Buddha is jinen. Now, I would think of jinen as Dharma niyama processes working in us and through us. We can label that outside ourselves, sort of imagine it as a shape or a form or a being or a figure. And yet it's not that. It's the nature of conditionality itself. Which can never be owned, earned, or deserved. So in Shinran's writings, he talks about Amida as a figure, as light, but also as a tree, as music, as a hall of Dharma, or as the Pure Land itself. Like all of that can be expressions of the limitless. So another of these linked terms that Shinran uses is the primal vow, Hongan. So in the myth, this is, the vows of Dharmakara. But then we could think of them as this is bodhicitta, active in the world, compassionate to us. These forces of conditionality, they're like, in a sense, as if, just want us to awaken. And Shinran says that the primal vow of Amida causes our going from the world, our leaving, our going forth. So it causes us to go forth to the Pure Land, this image for awakening. And it has fulfilled the cause for our returning to this world. So for Shinran, you go to the Pure Land, and that is your awakening. And the recompense, this is his word, like the recompense for going to the Pure Land, the benefit we receive is the state of benefiting and guiding others. He says, whether with regard to the aspect for going forth to the Pure Land or the aspect for return to this world, there is nothing whatever that has not been fulfilled through the Tathagata's directing of virtue to beings out of the pure vow mind. So what he's saying is that awakening is inseparable from compassionate activity. So the Pure Land is not somewhere you go and stay. It's something, I don't know, that you are granted. And then what that means is here you are in this world, in the forest of birth and death and the garden of the senses. And you are acting as a bodhisattva and you are helping and benefiting and guiding others. So you become part of this vow. You become part of Dharmaka as guiding and aiding beings to awakening. So Shinjin is another of these linked terms. And again, one could give a whole talk on the, what, Shinjin, but translated often true in trusting, but it's not really translatable. It's this Shinjin is belonging to Amida. It's of the nature of the limitless. And yet it is what awakens in us. It's us being illumined by the light. It's everything that we label as our responsiveness, our faith, our commitment, our going for refuge. For Shinran, this is Shinjin. This is given to us by Amida. So for Shinran, Shinjin is arising now for each of us. Otherwise, we would not be engaging in a Dharma life. And Shinjin arising in us means that we are certain of future enlightenment. We are assured future enlightenment. So this would mean, if we take it to a different way of looking, that we were all stream entrants. Okay, so don't worry about taking this literally and worrying about whether or not you're a stream entrant, because to be quite frank, you won't know anyway. It's more like, what would be the effect on how you lived your Dharma life if you just totally trusted that your connection with the transcendent would see you through? There's nothing to worry about. It's like, that's just going to take you through. Parami told me that once she was talking to Bhante about the nature of stream entry, and she said, oh, when you're a stream entrant, does that mean you don't have to make any more effort? And what Bhante said was, it doesn't mean that you won't make any more effort. It just means that that effort will be made. So in Shinran's terms, you could say that effort will arise naturally, Chinen, by the power of made to become so by itself. So again, you've got this sense of like, the path of practice isn't what generates realization. It's more that us being touched by the golden light, the vision, the realization, the insight, that is what causes the path. That is what generates the path. So all our practice is a result, it's a fruit of Shinjin awake and alive in us. And that's given to us. We don't have to sort of drive it or push it or generate it. So how would it change your Dharma life if that was the perspective that you lived within? So Shinran is holding these two aspects our karmic boundedness, and this Shinjin working in us and through us. He's holding these two aspects of what it is to live the Dharma life, in his terms, to live the Nembutsu together. And in the phrase Namo Amida Butsu, for him, Namo, that's us, conditioned, limited. And Amida Butsu, that is the limitless, the measureless. And they occur together in one phrase. We're constantly bringing these two into relation with each other. Excuse me, just working out what bits to drop so that I can do a slick conclusion. So I think a misunderstanding of this grasped, never to be abandoned, this being in touch with the limitless, can be that what you're looking for is peak devotional experience. You're looking for the presence of the Buddha. And of course, you can look for the presence of the Buddha. It's not that you can't, but it's more that you are living the Nembutsu. So like in every everyday moment, you're bringing awareness to these two aspects, like you is conditioned and limited and bound. And then this awareness that actually it doesn't really matter whether you're in touch with what is Buddha or you're not, because that's going to be there. That's not under your control, actually. It's like the Buddha is present whether you are paying any attention or not, or whether you're able to be receptive in that moment. So Nembutsu in Shinran's tradition looks like you just kind of say it very spontaneously. You make a cup of tea. Oh, namandabu, namandabu. You're going to the loo. Namanda, namandabu, namanda, namanda. And you get cross with someone. Namandabu, namandabu. You go outside and you see a rainbow, or you see the light on the snow. Namandabu, namanda. So you're continually bringing these two aspects to mind. And sometimes how the Buddha shows up is in terms of absence. So this is reimagining the Buddha. Sangharakshita has commented that the image of the Buddha may at times be experienced, as it were, by its absence. One may be vividly aware of one's own unenlightenment, one's distance from the Buddha, rather than the Buddha's own presence. One may feel quite happy and confident in an ordinary human sense, and yet feel intensely that one is trapped by one's fundamental ignorance of the nature of things in a vicious circle of self-attachment. Indeed, this recognition is necessary for a full realization of the Buddha's image. It is only to the extent that one knows one is not the Buddha that one can know the Buddha. Shadows reveal the light of the sun. So this is the essential Shin perspective, where it's like you're living your own shadow and you're living the relation to the sun. And actually it's like no sun, no shadow. And in the Shin Buddhist tradition, they talk about how you get, if you have light coming into a room, what that means is that you see all the motes of dust that are dancing in the air. So is it because of the sun you see the dust? But you could also say, well, because of the dust, because of our karmic defilement, our habits, our klesha, because of the dust, we see the light. The dust is what makes the light visible, just as the light is what makes the dust visible. And when we hold that perspective, we are illumined by the golden light of the Buddha. And the process of awakening happens naturally, jinen, made to become so by itself. I'm just going to finish with a few words of Shinran's, because he has such a perspective on Sangha and spiritual awakening being something that is conditioned and happening for people, in a collective, in a Sangha together. So he's writing this at the end of something, he's written a whole lot of stuff, and it's at the end, and he says, I have collected true words to aid others in their practice for attaining birth, in order that the process be made continuous, without end and without interruption, by which those who have been born first guide those who come later, and those who are born later join those who were born before. This is so that the boundless ocean of birth and death be exhausted.